Today we're going to be talking about rhombi and squares. Keep in mind that rhombi is just the plural of rhombus. So when we talk about a rhombus, it's the same thing, okay, just a singular. So let's talk about what is a rhombus first. And we're still talking about parallelograms. So a rhombus is a parallelogram. Okay. It also has to have four congruent sides. So if it is going to be a parallelogram, remember that the opposite sides have to be parallel and congruent. Okay. And if it's going to be a rhombus, that is true. And in addition, so we're adding to that, okay, we have to have all four sides are congruent. So just a parallelogram just says opposite sides have to be congruent. For a rhombus, all four sides have to have the same measurement. Next, we also are going to notice that rhombus has to have its diagonals be perpendicular. So when we have the diagonals of a rhombus here, okay, so all my sides are the same, the diagonals have to be perpendicular. And remember that perpendicular means that they are going to come together or intersect to form four right angles. Okay, so we'll have four right angles in here. Okay, and then the last thing is that the diagonals have to bisect opposite angles. Okay, I'm going to draw that one over here on the left just because I'm running out of room. So our diagonals, when we have our rhombus, okay, the diagonals are going to bisect opposite angles. So that means it's going to cut this angle exactly in half. It's going to cut this angle exactly in half. And the same thing is going to be true of the other diagonal. So this diagonal would cut this angle in half and this angle in half. Okay. So we have, it is a parallelogram. It has to have four congruent sides, and the diagonals are going to be perpendicular, and the diagonals are going to bisect or cut exactly in half the opposite angles. Okay, so it's really important information. Next, we're going to be talking about a square. So keep in mind, a rhombus is, if you're drawing a Venn diagram, is the big idea. So it has to have four congruent sides. Okay. Guess what? A square has to have four congruent sides. Right? Everything we know that's true about a rhombus, all of these facts that we just covered, that's a parallelogram, four congruent sides, the diagonals are perpendicular, the diagonals bisect opposite angles. All of those things are also true about a square. The only other thing that is also true about a square is that it has to have four right angles. A rhombus does not have that rule. So a rhombus can look like a square, right, because a square is going to be a type of rhombus. Or it could be like a squished or slanted square, right? In which case, remember, just our opposite angles then are congruent, and that means they're not going to be 90 degrees, right? So we'll look at some examples of those in class tomorrow. Okay, a square is also a type of rectangle, because remember, a rectangle is a parallelogram, and its opposite sides are congruent. It has to have right angles. Okay, all those things are true. But the difference between a rectangle and a square, or the reason a square is more specific, is because a rectangle doesn't have to have all four of its sides be congruent, and a square does. Okay, so a square is a type of rectangle. A square is also a type of rhombus. So it's going to be both. And if you'd like to see how these Venn diagrams, if you draw them together, would look, you can look at page 431 in your book, and they give you a really nice Venn diagram there. You can also look at the back of my classroom, right next to the pencil sharpener, and there's a Venn diagram with all of the quadrilaterals on there, so you can see how those interact as well. Okay. So let's look a little bit more carefully at squares. And so a square is a parallelogram, just like we talked about before. It's going to have four congruent sides, just like we talked about with the rhombus. And it's going to have four right angles, just like we talked about with a rectangle in the last section. Okay, so it's going to look like both. then all of the other rules that apply to a rhombus and all of the other rules that apply to a rectangle, they all apply to a square. So that means that its diagonals are going to be perpendicular. It means that its diagonals are congruent. It means that its diagonals will bisect the opposite angles. So you have to look at all of those facts that we already covered, and if it applies to a rhombus, it also applies to a square. If it applies to a rectangle, it also applies to a square. Okay? So if you were trying to prove is something a square, you would first need to prove, is it a rhombus? Okay? And you would need to prove, is it a rectangle? If you can prove that it is both of those, then, okay, so if we get check marks in both, then it is a square. Okay. So we're going to see lots of information there that combines those two other quadrilaterals that we've been dealing with, the rhombus and the rectangle. So it's going to be really important, again, that you make a list of those facts and that you know those facts by heart, because it's definitely going to be on the test. So tomorrow in class, we will work out some examples, and we'll get to practice those together. I really appreciate you watching our video this afternoon. Thank you, and I'll see you in class.